Hey, what's up guys? Zoko here and I'm back with a new build for you guys today. It's definitely been a minute since my last build. I've been spending that time grinding up my watermark and being a bit more focused on my personal life, but hopefully things are settling down and I will be able to pump things out more regularly. Recently, I've been playing a lot of Musket, a Musket bow combination to be specific, and I wanted to share that build with you guys because it's been a ton of fun. I will say this is a PvP build meant for Outpost Rush or group PvP in the open world. This generally does not do that well in PvE, so you probably want to have a separate setup when it comes to that. As always, we will start off with the skills and then move on to the attributes and gear afterwards. So starting off with the musket in the sharpshooter branch, we are going to grab Called Shot for an increased musket damage of 5% if aimed down sight for more than 3 seconds. Grab Greater Accuracy to remove the hip firing penalty. This helps us if we're being a bit more aggressive with the musket. Grab Empowering Headshot, which grants us Empower on a headshot. This is going to increase all damage from the musket by 10% for 5 seconds. Powder Burn is probably one of my favorite skills and probably what I use the most when it comes to the musket. You definitely want this whole skill line. This is a skill you apply where you reload your weapon with an overcharge that's going to end up dealing 110% weapon damage, and it's going to apply a burn effect to your target that deals 20% weapon damage per second for 9 seconds. But with the whole skill line, if you get a headshot, it's going to actually be 13 seconds. And then anybody you actually shoot just normally is going to deal an additional 12% additional damage because of this skill right here, Backdraft. We're also going to pick up Shooter's Stance, which causes us to kneel down. We're not going to be able to move when we're using this skill, but our reload time is reduced by 75%. Each shot we take deals 100% weapon damage, and with this follow-up skill, after we take 5 shots is when we exit the stance. We need to be very careful when we use this and not be around, a bunch of Great Axe users or something that's just gonna rush us and chop us to bits. It's kind of much more something you want to use in like a supporting nature. That's kind of, the purpose of this build though is to, help turn the tide of the people that are actually fighting. You're off in the, on the hills or something shooting the people that are engaged. Grab Ballistic Advantage, which removes the damage fall off from standard musket shots on targets more than 50 meters away. Hit your mark increases headshot and critical damage to targets the further the target is away from the player for a max of 15% damage at up to 100 meters away. And Heightened Precision, while aiming, successful hits with a musket grant a stackable 2.5 damage increase. This effect ends when the player stops aiming, down sight, or more than 5 seconds passes between shots. So again, if you're like on the hill and you're just shooting people that are in the mix and fighting, the more shots you take and hit within a shorter period of time, the more and more you're going to be able to actually help your team. And then to help that out even more, this ultimate passive sniper adds an optional 3x zoom view for your musket aim shots. Use your mouse wheel to actually zoom in and out, but on top of this, it also grants a 15% damage increase to all of your headshots. On the other tree, Salt in the Wounds increases 10% damage to targets below 30% health. Weakened Defense increases stamina damage from standard shots dealt to enemies blocking with shields by 50, and it just in general, it's going to deal 10% armor penetration to targets that aren't blocking with a shield. I'm pretty sure this applies to everybody and not just shield users, which is why I have it checked. With Hustle, after a dodge, you gain haste for 3 seconds. Tactical Reload is a major one. You really want to be paying attention to use this whenever you can. Dodging with the musket reloads instantly. It only happens once every 6 seconds, so you can't spam this, create like a personal Gatling gun or anything. But paying attention to when this reset will really help your DPS. Kick them when they're down. You deal 10% extra damage to targets with an active crowd control status effect. We don't really apply a ton of crowd control effects ourselves. We actually do want the traps here, so this is going to apply to that. A lot of the effects that our teammates are going to be applying to people, we're kind of banking on that to happen for this to take effect there. And then again, traps. This is probably more helpful in Outpost Rush. This is just a trap you drop on the ground. Is going to immobilize the target for 3 seconds, and then with trap damage, the follow-on ability, it's going to apply Rend, which is going to increase damage you do to that target by 20% for 3 seconds. Moving over to the bow. Grab Evasive Tactics, which is going to cause you to deal 20% more damage for 5 seconds after you dodge. I also like Evade Shot, which you leap back 5 meters and shoot an arrow, dealing 125% weapon damage. And with Evasive Knockback, Evade Shot pushes people back 2 meters. With Dodge and Weave, after you dodge, you gain 10% haste for 2 seconds. We also want to use Poison Cloud, the first 2 abilities in there. We don't want the third one. Shoot a poison arrow that on hitting a person or landing on the ground is going to create a cloud of poison 3 meters wide that lasts for 6 seconds. Anybody that enters the cloud are poisoned, dealing 10% weapon damage per second for 20 seconds. Now with the follow-on skill, Infected Arrows, the poison now does 12% weapon damage per second for 20 seconds instead of the 10% before. Now with Archer Speed, you gain 10% haste for 5 seconds when you swap to your bow. This can make it extremely hard for people to catch up to you if you're constantly switching back and forth. I know the Musket also had like a haste with it if you dodged with your Musket. All of this stacked up together can really help you in being evasive and hard to pin down. And with Mark, deal 10% more damage to foes suffering from a debuff. Again, we don't do a lot of debuffs ourselves, but we're kind of hoping that our teammates apply those debuffs and we are able to take advantage damage-wise in that instance. Over in the Hunter Tree, long range is going to deal 20% more damage to foes at least 10 meters away. We do want to grab Penetrating Shot, the whole skill line of Penetrating Shot. This is going to shoot an arrow dealing 150% weapon damage, and it's going to pass through targets and continue on for 100 meters. The follow-on Blood-Soaked Arrow is going to increase damage by 10% after each hit, so if you really line up your targets, it's just going to continue doing more and more damage as it goes on. And then with Deep Strike, Penetrating Shot deals 20% more damage to targets 20 meters or more away. With Aim True, heavy attacks fly faster and deal 30% more damage. Because of this type of skill, we want to be using heavy attacks as often as possible with the bow. Grab Finishing Shot because any target that is below 50% health is going to allow you to do 20% more damage. With Opening Strike, heavy attacks deal 20% damage to foes with 100% health. Now, because we spend a lot of time in the back lines, we are not going to be able to capitalize on this a whole lot. There's something you want to use instead of this. I say go for it, but I like to have this checked as the option in case I ever get more aggressive or I find myself in a position where people are, more or less on top of me. This becomes more applicable. With Arrow Range, increased arrow distance before the start of gravity by 100%. This just makes it a lot easier to aim. You don't have to account for like the drop off as much or as early. So I find this really helpful when it comes to aiming. Surprise Attack, if you haven't damaged anybody in the last 10 seconds, you deal 20% extra damage. Bullseye increases the crit chance of your bow shots by 10%. And then we want to grab Concussion. When you land a headshot, you deal 20% more damage and you get a chance to get your arrow back. Moving on to the attributes, I went with Dex up to 300 and then put the rest into Intelligence. Try to get to 150 Intelligence if you can. I'm still a bit short myself. Going to 300 Dex will benefit us by getting 5% chance to critical hit. We'll also get 5% thrust damage, which is the damage type that both our bow and our gun, our musket, use. Dodges will cost 10% less stamina, or 10 less stamina, and that will allow us to do 2 rolls in quick succession and not be completely depleted of our stamina. That's important because if you get completely depleted in your stamina, then it has to go all the way back up before you can actually utilize it again. So saving a little bit in the tank is much more beneficial and something you really ought to try and do. We also get a 10% bonus to headshot damage and a 10% bonus to critical damage on stunned, slowed, and rooted enemies. And then finally, there is a guaranteed critical hit after a dodge roll, and that can only be triggered once every 10 seconds. Now, if you do find yourself being much more aggressive, you can opt for some Constitution maybe instead of Intelligence, because then your bow will likely be much more of your preference, and that doesn't scale off of Intelligence at all, and you will be able to benefit from having a bit more health. This wasn't my intention with this particular build though, but I realize we all have different playstyles. The Intelligence perks that will benefit us are the increase to critical damage by 10% at the 100 intelligence mark, and then if you can get to 150, there's going to be a plus 15% to elemental damage, and that will really come into play if you decide to convert some of your weapons to a different damage type. This is really when that starts coming into play. That's where that's going to be affected. As for the gear, I went with the light bracket by wearing a medium chest and the rest of the pieces light. For my gear's perks, resilient is always the best option when it comes to PvP, in my opinion. While we are always trying to stay at range, we are still vulnerable to those ranged attacks from archers and musket users as well. And just like us, they have a good crit chance too, so having the ability to mitigate that as much as possible will be very beneficial. Now, if you don't feel like you need resilient or you're having trouble finding it, go for refreshing instead. This will reduce your cooldowns, your abilities cooldowns, and once you start stacking pieces together is when that perk really starts becoming noticeable with how much it is helping you. For your armor's gems, I would stick with Onyx for that physical damage reduction. It applies to the most weapons at this point, and you will get the most out of it. Now for the weapon traits. All right, so in a perfect world, I think I would prefer my musket and bow to have the same perks. Their attributes, though, wouldn't matter as much. I think I would prefer dex or a mix of dex and intel, but to be honest, even if we had one of our pieces at full intelligence, you can adjust your other gear attributes to try and hit the goals of the build. So with that, we have some flexibility. But for our perks, not so much. And to be honest, it's going to take a while to get the perfect roll in crafting them. The 3 perks we are looking for are Vorpal for headshot damage, Keenly Jagged for a bleed effect when we crit, and Enchanted, which increases damage from our regular attacks. It says light and heavy attacks, which don't really exist with the musket, but it still applies to the shots themselves. Now, some people ask about Keen, which increases crit chance, but to me, we already have a pretty high crit chance, and then, you take into account if we hit the head, it's a guaranteed crit as it is, so this isn't the best perk to have when put up against the other 3. It's not bad though, so if you roll like 2 of those mentioned with Keen, you still have a win in my book. In fact, it's still a very, very good weapon. Now for the gems to insert in these weapons, it's going to be pretty dependent on your play style. I'm going to give you a couple suggestions. Diamond can be a good option. This is best used for musket users that sit in more of a sniping spot or off to the side and behind the group. But if you're more aggressive or you sit in the open, at any point you're tagged, you will just lose like 12% of your damage immediately. Onyx might also appeal to some because it increases damage against targets with full HP, so you can really set someone on the defensive early on by using this. Just a giant hit right up front can, make some people start backpedaling. Malachite will increase damage against targets with active crowd control effects, which would also apply to people we are able to root using our own trap. But in the context of group PvP, most of the time we are just hoping someone is being affected by one of our teammates. And again, if you hit 150 intelligence, you might find a much better option in converting the damage to another element. Because remember, once you hit 150 intel, elemental damage is increased by 15%, so you may, again, find some more consistency in utilizing this at that point. All right, on to some tips with how to use it. Always apply powder burn to your musket in your downtime. If you're in outpost rush, apply it before the game starts. The cooldown will start and you will still have that round in the chamber ready to use. The cooldown has nothing to do with your actual shooting the bullet, just with using the skill itself. You can even switch weapons, and if you haven't shot that powder burn shot, it's still going to be in the chamber when you switch back to your musket. Something else you can do is if you have a chance to do this, you can use shooter stance in conjunction with your powder burn shot. So make sure you apply your powder burn first. You can't do it the other way. And then when you have the opportunity, obviously use your shooter stance and start unloading on your target. Using these 2 skills together is a very effective way to burst someone down. Just be mindful of where you post up because it's annoying to try and cancel out of this, and you can get yourself killed if used at the wrong time. But whenever I get in close on purpose, I am primarily using my bow. Now I do use musket for a couple things in a close range fight. Those 2 things are dropping a trap at a choke point like door and outpost rush or some other spot someone has to go through to pursue us or my teammates, and when time permits, applying powder burn again. Again, we are always trying to find time to apply that powder burn. And the other thing is using that dodge instant reload when in a closer fight. Hitting hitting 2 shots like that in quick succession can really turn the tables on a player. After doing that, I will switch to my bow and try to mop up utilizing like penetrating shot or something. As always, try to land headshots if you can. We have a few passives with both weapons that get an increase with headshot damage, and if you are lucky enough to be running Vorpal on a weapon, those headshots will be even nuttier. Please don't forget to leave a like on this video. It's one of the biggest ways you can help me get it out there. Leave me a comment with any questions you have, and if you're interested in more New World builds and guides in the future, consider subscribing. I'm Zoko, and I'll see you in a tournament.